The email arrived at 2:14 in the morning. I remember the time because I'd been lying awake on my small apartment couch, staring at my phone, feeling the relentless hammer of rain against the windows. The city outside my building had gone silent hours ago, except for the occasional rumble of distant thunder. I'd spent the last week applying to every random job I could find online, desperate to escape the suffocating streets, the endless traffic, the endless noise. Anything that would get me out of the city. My thumb hovered over the screen as I opened the email. The subject line made me pause: Camp Silver Pines, Summer Night Counselor position. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some generic spam. But there was something about the name that tugged at my memory, something that felt familiar. The email itself was short. Almost too short. Your application has been accepted. Report to Camp Silver Pines in Southern Ohio this Friday. Housing provided. Night shift begins after orientation. You will receive a list of rules upon arrival. Please follow them carefully. The last line made me frown. Please follow them carefully. I shrugged it off. Every job has rules. Corporate nonsense. I wasn't going to overthink it. 2 days later, I was driving down a narrow highway that cut through a dense, seemingly endless forest. Southern Ohio looks perfectly normal on a map, but in reality, it's another world. Hills rise and fall in deep green waves, the trees so thick the sun barely reaches the ground. For 20 minutes, my GPS sputtered and then died completely. The road curved and twisted, and I realized I hadn't seen another car in miles. Eventually, the dirt road opened to a rusted wooden sign. Camp Silver Pines, estimated 1956. The paint was peeling, wood warped and splintered from years of wind and rain. The sign creaked as the wind blew through the trees. Beyond it, the path disappeared into a forest tunnel, dim and endless. I slowed the car. The first cabins appeared between the trees, old wooden buildings with dark windows, sagging porches, some clearly abandoned. Others had lights on. Faint children's laughter floated through the woods from somewhere deeper in the camp. It should have felt normal. But it didn't. The air seemed heavy, almost expectant, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I parked near the main lodge. A tall man stood on the porch, waiting. He looked to be in his late 50s, with grey hair slicked back and eyes that seemed perpetually tired. His name tag read, Mr. Caldwell, Camp Director. You must be Daniel, he said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a tension in the way he held himself, like a taut string ready to snap. I nodded, unable to find words. He handed me a clipboard. Night Counselor, he said simply. Your job starts after sunset. I flipped through the papers. Schedules. Cabin assignments. Emergency procedures. But it was the final page that made me stop cold. The title read, Rules for After Dark. I chuckled nervously. Is this some kind of joke? Mr. Caldwell didn't smile. He just gestured for me to read them. I cleared my throat and went down the list. 1. After 10 p.m., no campers are allowed outside their cabins. 2. If you hear whistling coming from the woods, ignore it. 3. Do not approach the lake after dark. 4. If you see someone standing between the cabins who is not a camper or staff member, return to the lodge immediately. 5. If a camper claims someone is knocking on their cabin window, do not investigate. 6. If the generator shuts off between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., remain inside until power returns. 7. If you see a camper standing alone near the tree line after midnight, do not speak to them. I looked up at him, the weight of the words settling in. Okay, seriously. What is this? Mr. Caldwell's gaze drifted to the shadowy forest behind me. His voice dropped to a quiet, almost reverent tone. Those rules exist because someone didn't follow them once. I swallowed hard. There was a pause, long enough for the wind to rustle the trees, for the distant laughter of unseen children to echo faintly. Then he took the clipboard from my hands. "You start tonight." And that was the moment I realized something about Camp Silver Pines was very, very wrong. I turned toward my assigned cabin, the wooden boards creaking under my steps. The forest seemed alive around me, dark shapes moving in the corner of my eyes. Then I heard it. Faint. Slow. Somewhere deep in the woods, a whistling sound floated on the wind. I froze. And I remembered the rules. The campers went to bed around 9:30. At first, the cabins were full of the usual noise, kids laughing, whispering across bunks, the occasional burst of giggling that counselors would normally have to quiet down. But little by little, the sounds faded. One by one the cabin lights clicked off, and the entire camp slowly sank into that strange nighttime silence that only places deep in the woods seem to have. By 10 p.m., Camp Silver Pines felt completely different from the way it had during the day. Quiet. Still. Almost like the forest had taken it back. My job during the night shift was simple. At least, that's what they told me during orientation. Walk the grounds. Check the cabins. Make sure no kids were wandering around after lights out. Most camps probably had the same kind of routine. A quick patrol, a flashlight, maybe the occasional kid sneaking out to use the bathroom or grab a snack. Nothing serious. Still, as I stepped out onto the gravel path with my flashlight in hand, something about the air felt heavier than it should have. The forest surrounded the camp on all sides. Tall pine trees stretched endlessly into the darkness, their black silhouettes swaying slowly in the wind. Every time the branches shifted, they made a long creaking sound, like old wooden doors opening somewhere far away. The gravel crunched softly under my shoes as I started walking between the cabins. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness in a narrow tunnel of light. Cabin 1. I stopped beside the window and listened. Nothing but the quiet breathing of sleeping kids. All quiet. I moved on. Cabin 2. The lights were already off, and the inside was completely still. I shined the flashlight briefly across the window just to be sure. Rows of bunk beds. Blankets. Sleeping shapes. Everything looked normal. Cabin 3 was a little different. As I walked past the door, I heard whispering inside. Soft voices. A couple of kids still awake, probably telling ghost stories or trying to scare each other before finally falling asleep. That was normal. It happened almost every night at summer camps. I didn't bother interrupting them. They'd fall asleep soon enough. So I kept walking. Then I reached cabin 4. And that's when the whistling started again. At first it was so faint that I almost thought I imagined it. A soft, distant sound drifting through the trees. 3 simple notes. Slow. Almost playful. But unmistakable. My grip tightened slightly around the flashlight. I recognized the sound instantly. It was the exact same whistling I had heard earlier that evening while unloading supplies behind the mess hall. Back then, I had brushed it off. Probably another counselor somewhere in the woods. Maybe a camper messing around. But now, standing alone on the dark gravel path with the forest pressing in around me, the sound felt different. Because it wasn't random. It was steady. Controlled. Someone was whistling the same 3 notes over and over again. I remembered the list they had given us during orientation. The strange list of camp rules. Rule number 2. If you hear whistling coming from the woods, ignore it. At the time, the rule had sounded like some kind of weird camp tradition. The sort of spooky nonsense places like this used to mess with new staff members. But standing there in the dark, listening to those 3 slow notes echo through the trees, the rule didn't feel like a joke anymore. Still, a rule was a rule. So I ignored it. Or at least, I tried to. I forced myself to keep walking down the path, pretending the sound wasn't there. But the whistling didn't fade away. If anything, it slowly started getting closer. The sound drifted between the trees, moving through the forest like someone was slowly walking toward the camp. 3 notes. Pause. 3 notes again. The pattern repeated over and over. I stopped walking. The forest suddenly felt much darker than it had a moment ago. The beam of my flashlight seemed too small, too weak against the endless wall of trees. For a second, I had a strange thought. What would happen if I turned the flashlight off? Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked the switch. The light disappeared instantly. The forest became pure darkness. Not dim. Not shadowy. Just completely black. And the whistling stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so sudden it made my chest tighten. My heart started pounding in my ears. For several seconds, nothing moved. No wind. No branches creaking. No whistling. Just silence. Then something shifted between the trees. I couldn't see it clearly in the darkness, but I knew something was there. A shape. Tall. Too tall to be a camper. Too still to be an animal. A chill ran up the back of my neck. I quickly flicked the flashlight back on. The beam shot across the trees. Empty. Nothing stood there. No person. No animal. Just rows of pine trunks stretching endlessly into the darkness. But even though I couldn't see anything anymore, I could still hear something moving out there. Soft footsteps crunching through leaves. Slow. Careful. Like something pacing just beyond the edge of the light. Then the whistling started again. 3 notes. This time much closer. So close that it sounded like it was right behind me. I spun around instantly, raising the flashlight. The beam cut across the empty path and the silent row of cabins behind me. Nothing. No one. Just the dark windows of sleeping campers and the wind gently moving the trees. My heart was racing now. Every instinct told me to run back toward the main lodge. But I forced myself to breathe. Force myself to remember the rule. Rule number 2. Ignore it. So that's exactly what I did. I turned back toward the path and continued walking, trying to act like I hadn't heard anything at all. Step by step, the gravel crunched beneath my shoes. The whistling followed for a while longer. Always somewhere behind me. Never too close. Never too far. Eventually, the sound drifted back toward the woods again. Slowly fading into the trees until the forest was silent once more. But even as I finished my patrol and headed back toward the staff cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling crawling in the back of my mind. Because deep down, I knew something. The whistling hadn't gone away. Whatever had been moving through those trees, it was still out there. Watching. Around midnight I was sitting in the small security office inside the main lodge, trying to stay awake as the quiet weight of the forest pressed in around the camp. The office was barely bigger than a storage closet, with an old wooden desk, a dusty corkboard filled with camp notices, and a small radio that crackled every now and then with static. A single yellow lamp cast a tired glow across the room. Outside the window the forest stretched endlessly, a wall of black pine trees swaying gently in the cold wind. The camp had gone silent hours ago. Lights out had been at 9:30. By 10 the cabins were completely quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, no whispers from the kids trying to stay up past bedtime. Just the occasional rustling of branches and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere deeper in the woods. I leaned back in the chair and rubbed my eyes. Night shift at Camp Silver Pine sounded easy when they explained it during orientation. Walk the grounds. Check the cabins. Make sure no campers wandered outside after dark. Simple. But the rules they gave us made it feel different. 7 rules. Strange rules. Rules that didn't sound like normal camp safety procedures. My eyes drifted to the folded paper sitting on the desk. The list was still there where I had left it earlier. I hadn't read it again since the evening, but I could remember most of them from memory. Especially the ones that didn't make any sense. Rule number 3. If you hear footsteps on the roof of a cabin after midnight, do not look up. Rule number 4. If a camper asks about the man standing in the tree line, tell them it's a scarecrow. And then there was rule number 5. That one stuck in my head more than the others. The radio suddenly crackled. The sharp burst of static made me jump in my chair. Then a small voice came through the speaker. "Counselor." It sounded nervous. "Young." I grabbed the radio quickly and pressed the talk button. "Yeah, this is the night counselor," I said. "What's going on?" For a moment there was only static again. Then the voice returned, quieter this time. "Someone's outside my window." The words made my stomach drop instantly. "Which cabin?" I asked. "Cabin 6. I stood up so fast the chair leg scraped loudly across the wooden floor. Cabin 6 was one of the far cabins, near the edge of the tree line where the forest pressed closest to the camp. "Stay inside," I said quickly into the radio. "Don't open the door for anyone." "I'm coming right now." I grabbed my flashlight from the desk and pushed the lodge door open. The cold night air hit me immediately. The gravel path stretched out between the dark shapes of the cabins, barely visible under the dim pole light scattered around the camp. Beyond them the forest loomed like a massive black wall. Tall pine trees swayed slowly in the wind. Their branches creaked softly, the sound reminding me of old wooden doors slowly opening somewhere in the dark. I started walking fast, my flashlight beam bouncing across the ground. Cabin 1 passed on my left. Quiet. Cabin 2. Still dark. Every cabin window was black. Every door closed. The entire camp looked frozen in sleep. But the closer I got to cabin 6, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees looked taller. The shadows thicker. The beam of my flashlight shook slightly in my hand. When I finally reached the cabin, I knocked on the door. The wood creaked softly as it opened. A little boy stood in the doorway. Marcus. I recognized him from earlier that evening during check-in. He looked about 9 years old, maybe 10 at most. His face was pale and his hands were trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the door. "Someone's knocking," he whispered. I stepped inside the cabin and shut the door behind me. The other campers inside were asleep in their bunks, completely unaware of what was happening. "Did you see them?" I asked quietly. Marcus shook his head. "But they keep tapping." The moment he finished speaking, the sound came. Tap. 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 It came from the back window of the cabin. Marcus slowly turned his head toward it. My heart began beating faster. And suddenly the rule flashed through my mind again. Rule number 5. If a camper claims someone is knocking on their cabin window, do not investigate. I swallowed. Every instinct in my body told me to walk over to that window and shine my flashlight outside. Anyone would do that. Any normal counselor would check. Marcus looked up at me with wide eyes. "Are you going to check?" he asked. For a moment I didn't answer. Then the tapping came again. Tap. 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 Slow. Patient. Like someone calmly knocking on the glass. I forced myself to move away from the window. Instead of opening the curtain, I pulled it shut. Marcus watched me in confusion as I locked the window latch. "It's probably just a branch," I said, trying to sound calm even though my voice felt tight. "Go back to bed, Marcus. I'll stay outside for a few minutes." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and climbed back onto his bunk. I stepped out of the cabin and gently closed the door behind me. The forest was even darker now. The wind had slowed, leaving the entire camp wrapped in an eerie silence. For a moment nothing happened. Then I heard it. From behind the cabin. Tap! 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 But this time it wasn't just knocking. It sounded like something slowly dragging its fingers across the glass. From the outside. At exactly 2:07 a.m., the power went out. 1 second the lodge was glowing with the dim yellow light from the hallway lamps, and the next second everything went completely black. Not dim. Not flickering. Just gone. The generator cut out with a sudden mechanical cough somewhere behind the main building. The low humming sound that usually filled the night disappeared instantly, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt unnatural. For a moment I just sat there in the darkness of the security office, staring at the dead radio on the desk. Then the rules came rushing back. Rule number 6. If the generator shuts off between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., remain inside until the power returns. Do not go outside. Do not investigate. Wait. That rule had always bothered me. Generators fail sometimes. Storms knock out power. Animals chew through cables. But whoever wrote the camp rules made this one sound like the time itself mattered. Between 2 and 3 a.m. That exact window. And now, here I was. Right in the middle of it. I reached for my flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness of the office, illuminating the dusty wooden walls and the row of security monitors that were now completely black. Outside, the forest had swallowed the entire camp. No cabin lights. No path lights. Nothing. The wind moved softly through the pine trees, making their branches creak and whisper against each other. For a minute, I just sat there, listening. Waiting. Trying to convince myself the generator would kick back on any second. But it didn't. And that's when I saw it. Through the window facing the main path. At first it looked like a shadow standing near the tree line. The flashlight beam barely reached that far, but I could still make out the shape. A small figure. A kid. Standing completely still near the edge of the woods. My stomach tightened. A camper? Out here? At this hour? That didn't make sense. All the cabins were locked down after lights out, and the counselors did head counts twice before midnight. No kid should have been wandering near the forest alone at 2 a.m. The figure didn't move. Didn't shift. Didn't even turn its head. It just stood there. Watching the lodge. Something about the stillness made the back of my neck prickle. Then another rule surfaced in my mind. Rule number 7. If you see a camper standing alone near the tree line after midnight, do not speak to them. The wording had always sounded ridiculous. Why would a rule like that exist? If a kid was outside alone at night, the obvious thing to do was help them. Bring them back to their cabin. Make sure they were okay. But now, standing in that silent office with the power out and the forest pressing in around the camp, the rule didn't feel ridiculous anymore. It felt like a warning. The kid out there still hadn't moved. The longer I stared, the more something felt wrong. But then the figure shifted slightly. Just a small movement. And for a second it looked like they were shivering. Scared. Alone. I exhaled slowly. Great job, I muttered to myself. You're letting the stupid rules get to you. It was probably just a kid who had a nightmare. Or sleepwalked. Or got scared when the power went out. I grabbed my jacket and opened the office door. The cold night air hit me immediately. The camp looked completely different without electricity. The gravel paths and wooden cabins were barely visible beyond the reach of my flashlight. But the figure was still there. Near the trees. Waiting. Hey! I called out as I stepped off the porch. You shouldn't be out here. The words echoed faintly through the empty camp. The figure didn't respond. Didn't wave. Didn't speak. It just stood there. I started walking down the path toward the woods, my flashlight beam bouncing slightly with each step. "Which cabin are you from?" I shouted. Still nothing. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. A normal kid would have said something by now. Answered. Moved. But this one stayed perfectly still. Like it was waiting for me. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the tree line. 20 feet away. 15. 10. My flashlight beam finally reached the figure's face. And that's when my blood turned to ice. It looked like a camper. Same uniform hoodie. Same messy hair. Same small frame. But the face wasn't right. The skin looked stretched too tightly across the bones, like something had pulled it on the wrong way. The eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the flashlight with a dull, glassy shine. Then the mouth slowly began to move. Stretching. Wider. And wider. Until it became an impossible smile. A smile no human face could make. I froze where I stood. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't move. The thing wearing the camper's face tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest behind it, branches started snapping. One after another. Movement in the darkness. My flashlight trembled as I raised it toward the trees. And that's when I saw them. More figures. Stepping out from between the trunks. Small shapes. Dozens of them. Each one looked like a camper. Each one standing unnaturally still. And each one smiling the same stretched, impossible smile. They slowly spread along the tree line, forming a silent row at the edge of the forest. All of them staring at me. Watching. Waiting. The thing in front of me didn't move. It just kept smiling. Then somewhere far out in the darkness, I heard it again. A long, slow whistle drifting through the trees. The exact same sound I'd heard earlier that night. Soft. Patient. Calling from somewhere deep in the forest. And suddenly I understood something that made my chest tighten with dread. The whistle hadn't been trying to scare us. It had been calling them. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. My legs just moved on their own, pounding against the dirt path as branches scraped my arms and the cold night air burned in my lungs. The flashlight in my hand bounced wildly, the beam jerking across the ground, the trees, the empty trail ahead of me. Behind me, the forest felt alive. I could hear movement in the darkness. Not footsteps exactly, more like something large shifting through the trees. Branches creaked softly. Leaves rustled where there was no wind. And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, I heard it again. Whistling. 3 slow notes. The same pattern. Over. And over. And over. I ran faster. The path back to the lodge felt longer than it had earlier that night. Every shadow looked like something standing there waiting. Every tree looked too tall, too thin, like it might bend down and grab me. My chest felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't slow down. Not until the lodge finally appeared through the trees. The building looked different than it had before. Dark. Silent. Empty. The power was still out, so the windows were black, reflecting nothing but the pale glow of the moon. I burst through the front door and slammed it shut behind me. For a moment I just stood there in the darkness, gasping for air. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited. Listened. But the whistling didn't follow me. The forest outside the lodge had gone completely silent. I stayed there in the security office for the rest of the night, sitting in the chair with the flashlight clutched in my hand like it was the only thing keeping me safe. Every few seconds I glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:37 a.m. 2:45 a.m. 2:52 a.m. The longest hour of my life. And then, right on time. 3 a.m. The power came back. The lights flickered once, then filled the lodge with a dull yellow glow. The heater kicked on. The vending machine in the corner hummed back to life. Everything suddenly felt normal again. Too normal. Like nothing had happened. Outside, the forest had gone quiet again. Completely quiet. No wind. No animals. No whistling. Just silence. Morning came slowly. The sun rose over the trees, and the camp started waking up. Kids ran between the cabins. Counselors headed to breakfast in the mess hall. It looked like any other peaceful summer morning. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. So I went straight to Mr. Caldwell's office. He was already there, sitting behind his desk like he had been expecting me. A mug of coffee rested in his hand, steam rising slowly from the top. When I walked in, he didn't seem surprised at all. "You look like you had a rough night," he said calmly. I closed the door behind me. Then I told him everything. About the power going out. About the figure standing near the tree line. About the whistle. And about the things I saw in the woods. He didn't interrupt once. He just listened. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair and slowly nodded. "Now you understand," he said. Those 4 words sent a chill down my spine. I asked him the question that had been sitting in my head all night. "What are those things?" For a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. He stared out the window behind me, toward the forest that surrounded the camp. Then he spoke. But not directly. "They've always been here," he said quietly. Long before the camp. The way he said it made my stomach turn. I frowned. "Then why keep the camp open?" I asked. Mr. Caldwell sighed. A long, tired sigh, like someone who had carried the same burden for years. "Because," he said slowly, "if the cabins stay full, they stay in the woods." I didn't understand at first. But the longer I thought about it, the worse it sounded. Like the camp wasn't there for the kids. It was there for something else. Something watching from the forest. I quit that same day. No argument. No 2-week notice. I went back to my cabin, packed my things into my car, and drove toward the camp entrance as fast as I could. The gravel road stretched out in front of me, winding between the trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches, making the forest look peaceful again. But I knew better now. When I reached the main gate, I slowed the car for a moment. And before I left, I made the mistake of looking back. At the edge of the forest, right where the trees began, something was standing there. Tall. Perfectly still. Watching. Even in the daylight I couldn't make out its face. It was just a dark shape between the trees, thin and unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then, faintly, very faintly, I heard it again. Whistling. The same 3 notes. Slow. Patient. Repeating again. And again. And again. A cold realization settled deep in my stomach. Those rules at Camp Silver Pines. They weren't written to protect the campers. They were written to protect everyone else. From whatever lives in the woods around that camp. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear those 3 notes in my head. Over. And over. And over.